So welcome. Thanks for coming this afternoon. My name's Gareth Jones. I'm an API architect on the OneNote team at Microsoft. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about building great consumer experiences against our new OneNote API. So before we get started, look at this quote from Bill Gates from a couple of months ago on a Reddit Ask Me Anything. Just give you a couple of seconds to look at that. So Bill specifically points out the notion of digital memories. And we really believe that among all the chaos of our digital lives, thousands and thousands of files and pieces of information across dozens and dozens of websites and properties, the ones that we really think of as associated as being part of our memory, an extension of our memory, are really the ones that we tend to think are most valuable, that we have the most attachment to. And on the OneNote team, we really believe that OneNote's a fantastic place to manage and store those memories. And particularly, we want to enable people to do more with those digital assets that are memories, and to enable you to build apps that let people do more and exploit those memories to do great things. So what are we going to look at today? We're going to look what the OneNote API is and what it can do. And we're going to drill into an application that I built to show how to use the OneNote API to work with some digital memories that are particularly important to me. I'm going to go and have a look. So REST API, obviously this is a cross-platform thing, so we're going to have a look at using our API from iOS and Android, get a Mac demo, and then we're going to switch gears completely and go and look to the future and look at the roadmap for the API. Sound good? Yeah? Okay. So just to recap a little bit, OneNote's been around for a little over a decade. And March 17th of this year was a really big day for the product. We launched our free Mac client, first time for us on the Mac, made our Windows desktop client free, launched our API, which you can imagine I was pretty excited about. And so we're now in a position where we've got free clients on every platform. We've hit number 6 on the iPad store. And we've been actually number 1 on the Mac. We're at number 8 as of last night when I went and updated these slides last. Obviously, these things go up and down on a day-to-day basis. So pretty pleased about those numbers. And you'll have seen, some of you yesterday, that we announced that we'd done 12 million downloads of Office for the iPad in our first week. So we really believe there's a fantastic opportunity for you to reach out and hit a large number of active users using OneNote across any platform. Every new Windows PC is going to ship with OneNote pre-installed. So again, more eyeballs, more active users for your applications to target. And very importantly, again, I want to emphasize free on all platforms. So that API that we shipped, March 17th, we shipped with 12 great partners alongside us. All of them found it pretty easy to integrate with our API. They all did it in a very short amount of time. They all got great products out there on day 1 with us for launch. And now, of course, we're out there looking for the next set of people to come as we've now gone broadly public and build apps on our platform. So what is the OneNote API? Well, it's a very simple REST API for creating pages. Page is the key abstraction in OneNote. Has everybody here actually used OneNote? I'm guessing you wouldn't be in the room if you hadn't. Yeah, okay, good. So page is the key abstraction in OneNote. Right now, the API allows you to create pages. When you're creating pages on any kind of internet-based system, HTML is the lingua franca of page creation. So it was a no-brainer for us to use HTML to go and drive the content model for OneNote through the API. When I talk about consumer scenarios, the OneNote REST API stores your content in OneNote notebooks on OneDrive. It's quite difficult to keep saying all these sentences with one in them and have the right second word come out. So OneNote on OneDrive. Our authentication is completely standard OAuth 2 against Microsoft accounts. So all standard web technologies for everything. And we've got a set of content helpers. We want you to be able to get rich content into OneNote to make great experiences. And when I start my demo, you'll see some what we mean by being able to put in powerful content very quickly with very little HTML. So what does that actually look like in practice? So our post endpoint is there. Hopefully you can see the cyan. API 1.0 pages. And you just go and post to that. And you post standard HTML. You'll see here I've got a couple of extra tags in here. I'm specifying a meta tag with the created date for the page. I'm setting the title for the page, which is going to go through to the OneNote title. And then I've just got some standard HTML content here just to fit on the slide. I put something very trivial, say hello OneNote in a header, and then insert a picture. And that's going to bring you up. I'm bringing up here the modern Windows Store OneNote client with that OneNote Rocks title, my header, and then a picture of, actually it's my Lego set that I'm sure you're all pretty jealous of that I had for my birthday a couple of weeks ago. So that's a very trivial sample. Let's go and have a look at a much more fleshed out real world sample. So when I was thinking about putting together this talk, it was very easy for me to think about the piece of content I wanted to think about both capturing as memories and doing more with. I mean, you know, everybody has precious family photos and, you know, movies of the birth of their child, which I probably wasn't going to show you that. But the thing for me that I actually do something with on a regular basis in terms of digital memories, I go to a lot of concerts. It's one of the great things about living in Seattle. Whenever you say you live in Seattle, the first things people talk about is the weather and the rain, and yes, it does rain, but I'm from England, so I'm used to that. But the thing Seattle has is an absolutely fantastic and diverse music scene, and I've taken full advantage of it. As you can see from my really awful gig photography from my cell phone, and it really is blurry and bad, believe me. But I, you know, it's something I really love. And I actually do something with those memories. They're not just things that I, you know, tuck away on some folder in my OneDrive. I go and bore my friends writing diatribes about these things on Facebook. About once a year, maybe a couple of times a year, I go and write up a sort of best concerts of the year. And, you know, usually somebody then pings me and says, well, hey, that concert was actually the year before and stuff like that. So having a better set of assets that I can just go back and quickly leaf through to put that stuff together is actually really nice for me and something I genuinely do. So with that, oops, let's go and flip over to our demo machine and have a look at this app that I built. So my app is called Gig Notes, and first thing I'm going to do is run it up so we can get actually a sense of what it's about. So it's a Windows 8.1 store app, and it's a hub window-based app, so you've got the typical vertical slices, some nice graphics of people enjoying themselves, and then some instructions about what to do and a list of gigs. So what we're going to do here with this app is I'm going to go off to Outlook.com, our consumer email service, and go and scrape through that with its API and look for all the concerts that I'm going to. I just tag them with a little gig marker. So let's run that up. You can see I've done a single sign-in, so the app knows that it's me, that it's going to look in. I haven't had to go and log in because I've got my Windows Live account matched up to my Windows login account with Windows 8, so I get that nice single sign-on experience. And the very first button I press doesn't work, so once in a while it does this. I just need to restart it. Hopefully that's my moment of demo not workingness and the rest will all just work. There we go. Okay, so that's now going off to the web and getting my concerts, and you'll see a bunch of concerts here. These are kind of fake concerts. It's sort of some of my dream list of who would be playing where in Seattle, rather than my real concerts, because I'm actually not going to a whole lot in the next month. So what I'm now going to do is go and click on one of these and go and make a OneNote page to help me both find my way to that concert and have all the things I need and give me somewhere to write about it. So I'm going to go and choose let's choose Skrillex. So Skrillex is this electronic dance music artist. Pretty noisy dubstep stuff. My wife thinks it's horrendous. She also thinks I'm about 20 years too old to be listening to it, but she may have a point. So here's a beautiful OneNote page that I've created from my application. So I've just full screened that. You can see it's got really nice content. And what I've done is I've gone out to a whole bunch of different consumer APIs to pull this page content together and then pushed it into OneNote through our API. So let's sort of walk down the page looking at what I pulled together. And then we'll go see the code for how to do it. So nice banner headline image for Skrillex. And then here you'll see an embedded PDF file, which I can go open with a ticket. So pretty much all tickets these days for concerts are electronic. So I just go and save them when I buy the tickets and go and stuff them in a folder on my OneDrive called Tickets. So I'm now then going to go and fetch this and pull it into OneDrive, into OneNote, sorry. See, I told you it was hard to say the right word. Then I've got a map of the concert venue from Bing Maps, description of the venue in case I've not been there before, from Wikimedia. Some news to read while I'm waiting for the gig to come on, catch up on the latest gossip for the band from Big News. Biography. So there's actually a fairly large number of companies out there with music-related APIs. I just picked one here. Echo Nest is a great company. They're actually kind of an aggregator of APIs. But they've got an API here which lets me go and get the biography of the band, particularly if it's somebody that I'm taking an experiment on, I perhaps don't know a whole lot about them. And they're here aggravating Last.fm's description of the biography of the band. And then I've created a section for me to go and type in the set list. One of the things I find the most useful when I'm writing a review is, oh yes, if I actually made the effort on my phone, obviously I'll have OneNote on my phone to do this in the concert, to go and write down the list of songs and maybe a couple of words about whether it was a good version or whether it was just the same as the CD and I wasn't very excited or whatever. And then a bit later, obviously I'm not going to write a full review when I'm in the concert, I've got better things to do, but I've got this page to then actually go and pull it all together and write my review. So I'm pretty pleased with this app. It kind of covers what I want to do out of going to a concert. It gets me there, it gets me in the door with my ticket, which I'm always scrambling around at the last minute for. So let's go and see now how that app is actually built. So, go to my Visual Studio application for Gig Notes. And the first thing we want to do is have a look at that authentication. So I said we do authentication with OAuth 2 over Windows Live accounts. And the Windows Live SDK is the easiest way in your applications to go and build that in quickly on client devices or websites. So let's go and find my front page where I've got my login. So the first thing we need to do is go and look at this variable called scopes. So when you authenticate with OAuth 2, generally you're authenticating to do something specifically. So you're essentially authenticating and authorizing at the same time. So here what I'm doing is saying that when I log in, I'm going to actually ask for permission to do a certain set of things. So OneNote has its own scope, office.onenote create. So that's my permission to go and create pages in OneNote. Then I'm saying I want to actually be able to sign in, that's kind of obvious. That I'd like some basic profile information that allows me to put up my name, Gareth Jones, in the application. Then offline access, that I don't want to have to go back and redo a sign-in every time I start the app. I wanted to cache the credentials offline to get that single sign-on experience. And then I want access to my calendar. This gives me the Outlook.com access. And then I want access to my OneDrive. We haven't actually changed the string over this yet, so this one still says SkyDrive. Okay, so what do I do with those scopes? If I go down to my sign-in method, you see it's incredibly simple code. So I get an object from the Windows Live SDK, an auth client object that I need up in the constructor, and I just go and ask it to initialize and pass in the scopes. So initialize is my silent sign-on method. So if I've already got cached credentials, this will just come back and say, yes, you're initialized, and return immediately with no UI, which is the way we saw with me login. If that fails, what that's telling me is that either my cookie has aged out, I haven't signed in for too long, and I need to go and renew my cookie. I haven't actually put the cookie renewal code in here for clarity. Or that I've never signed in before, so Windows needs to pop up a UI. And that UI is all actually inside Windows to go and get the credentials. So you don't have to bother with any of that actually in your application. And then I go and update my UI to show my name once the sign-in has worked. OK, so once we've signed in, I'm going to go off to Outlook and get those list of gigs. That's not really terribly material to OneNote, so I'm going to gloss over that. And then once I've got the list of gigs, I'm going to go and click on one. You saw me click on the Skrillex one. Let's go and drive into to what's happening there when I go and click on the gig. So this is an MVVM application. So all the logic for that interaction happens in the view model. So I've got a view model for each gig that's been set up. And as you'd expect, there's a pointer in that through to my underlying data model. So my data model for a gig, if I go and see the gig type, you can see that I've just got a simple, essentially a POCO class with no logic, just to hold the artist, the venue, the map of the venue, the description, all the stuff that you saw on the OneNote page is my underlying model, a list of news items, and my ticket. Okay, so I've got the underlying data item set up for my view model. Then I've got a command to handle the click. And that command drives through to this code, create gig pages. So what I'm going to do here when I'm creating the gig pages, I've got that gig object. I'd pre-filled out when I went and fetched the Outlook calendar just a couple of the fields in it, the artist and the venue, because I could get those from the calendar. And I'd gone and got that image just so I'd got something nice to show in the UI. There's still an awful lot of fields to be filled in before I can create the OneNote page. So I need to go to a bunch of web services to get those. So I'm going off to Bing to get the news. I'm going to Bing Maps for the venue map. I'm going to fetch that biography and venue descriptions from Wikipedia and tickets from OneDrive. All of these I need to go and do asynchronously. They're all web service calls. Obviously don't want to disrupt my API. So I'm actually doing them all in parallel, just so the thing comes together quickly. And I've just got these little helper classes that are returning tasks. And each of them pretty much just uses the same kind of code. They go off, they have an API ticket, usually, that you've signed up for on the web page of whatever that service is. So you go to something like Bing Maps, and then you sign up and say, hey, I'd like to use this API. And you get a client ID or an API ticket that allows you to pass that through to make calls to them, and they can keep an eye on then, what kind of rate people are using their APIs and make sure nobody's abusing them. So most of these just go and use that ticket and make an HTTP client call, pull the result down asynchronously, and then parse the JSON that gets returned back, which is pretty much the universal thing that people are doing now with web services. So when I've got all of those pieces back, I've then got a fairly fully formed gig object with all of the data that I need to create my OneNote page. So I'm then going to go and call this facade over the top of OneNote that I've written, which we're going to drive into in more depth. Get back the URI to allow me to actually launch the OneNote client, and then use the standard Windows APIs to actually go and fire up OneNote against that API, and as you saw, bring up the page. So the meat of it is obviously going and creating the OneNote page through my facade here. So the HTML that we need to create, I could obviously put together in a whole bunch of ways. I could just, if it's simple, I can just kind of cruft it together in a string. What I've done here is I've embedded the HTML as an asset in my application. So I've got a gig page asset here. And I've added a simplistic search and replace. So this is not some fancy ASP.NET or Razor type system. This is a very, very simple search and replace. So I've just got some tokens that I'm going to pull out the data from my model and override them for things like the artist, the date. So let's have a look at this HTML. You can see it's fairly standard, but it's a little bit, I suppose busy is the word. So at the moment, there's a few things we haven't done in our API yet. So we haven't got CSS style sheets. And so you'll see quite a lot of styles repeated in here. So there's a bit of cut and paste at the moment. We'll add things like that as we go along with the API. And the other thing you'll see is a lot of tables. So it's key to remember that OneNote isn't actually a browser. So you're not doing a CSS-based layout. OneNote's rendering engine, if you want to create a rich page like that, is fairly dependent actually on creating a tabular-based layout. So you'll see a lot of tables typically in a OneNote solution. You can think of it a little bit like designing an HTML3 web page, if you like that blast from the past. Go Netscape. So a bunch of tables here. You see my headings that I created for the artist and the key image there for the artist. And then we drop down into a table for my news and my event location, which was on the right, if you recall, asking you to remember what my app looked like here. And then we get down to having the biography and then the set list and review tables at the bottom. So let's pick out a couple of things that are a little bit OneNote specific. So if I go and find my images in here, actually, let's go and find the first one. So the first image is just as you'd expect, a regular image tag with a source pointing to a URL. And as you'd expect, OneNote's API goes and fetches images from the internet when you just have to send us the URL and we'll go and retrieve them for you the same way that a browser would. But the second one has got a custom URI, name:venue map. So for this one, we're actually trying to point to the Bing image for the map of the venue. And what venue map allows us to do is to actually send the bytes of the image up as part of a multi-part MIME message. I'll show you that back in the code in a moment. But why would we want to do that? Why wouldn't we just send the URL to the Bing image? Surely that's easier, right? Now, the Bing API, as it turns out, you pass your API ticket along with the URL to get the images. You don't make two calls. You don't make one call to say, get me the list of public URLs, and then a second call to just get the URLs. You actually have a single call which encodes your ticket. And it doesn't seem very appropriate to go sending my API ticket off to the OneNote service to ask it to pick it back. You know, that API ticket was supposed to be private to my app's usage. So what I'm actually doing in this application is pulling down those bytes of that image myself in the application, and then packaging them up and sending the bytes back to OneNote. It's a little more inefficient, but I'm keeping things private that way. Okay, so let's go and look at the code and how we do that. So I'm going to go down to my OneNote facade. So the first thing we're going to do is pull in that gig page asset, just standard asset loading inside a Windows 8 app, pull it in as a stream, read it in, pull it in as a string. And then what I've got to do is go and do all of those search and replaces. So I've got a little helper to go and pull out the tokens and just literally do a replace either of a URI or some HTML encoded version of the model that I have of my data. Then, so we go down past the simple ones and get into a couple of more complicated ones. Here I've got a news fragment. So here I'm actually putting in quite a large piece of HTML. I just had one token replaced for that entire table of 3 news articles. Just flip back to the OneNote page again as a reminder. You see I have this table here with 3 nice images, headlines. All of that I'm actually creating on the fly in my code. And I wanted to have that mixed up to see that it's not just all about having a template. You know, you can mix and match these things obviously very easily, because at the end of the day, all you're trying to do is get a string of HTML to send to our API. So if we go and have a look at my make horizontal news strip, then you can see this chunk of HTML, I'm more doing a kind of print style of HTML, a printf kind of style, to form it up in line. So pretty much you can imagine a bunch of different ways to pull this together. I could have done this with another mini template for each table cell. Okay, let's go back a little bit. And then the last thing I wanted to show that's interesting about the HTML is that the PDF attachment, we're sending with an object tag. So this is what we use to say, embed an attachment on a page, kind of a fairly standard use of an object tag, even in a browser world. We've added a custom HTML attribute data attachment here to let you specify the file name. Obviously, if you double-click or do a save as on an attachment in OneNote, you want there to actually be a myfile.pdf file name for you to be able to save, and there isn't a standard tag in HTML for that. And then the data comes through. And again, we're using this name : syntax for the URI for ticket. So let's go now and see how that URI works. So we're going to create having pulled together all of that string for our HTML, we're going to go and make a multi-part form data message. This is how we bundle together a bunch of different things we want to send to the API. It's pretty standard HTML technique that we're using. So the first piece of content is that HTML string, which you have to put into a part specifically named presentation. That always has to be there in the message. And that's of type text HTML, as you'd expect. And then if I've got a map of my venue, then I'm actually creating another part, which is just a byte array, using that data that I pulled down from Bing Maps. Adding that, no, I don't want an Office update, thank you. And obviously that's of type JPEG. And here then I'm adding the name venue map. So this is where my URI, where I reference the image, where I said name : venue map, I'm specifying this as the MIME part name here. And that's how you bind those two together. And then the same thing for the gig, where I'd said in my object tag that the data came from name : ticket. I'm specifying the part name for my PDF file, which I've read in from OneDrive, which in this case the type is PDF, name : ticket. Okay, so I've now got a multi-part MIME message. And I'm going to go and use the HTTP post verb and send that to our OneNote endpoint. I'm going to do that asynchronously again, obviously because of the UI. And then I'm going to look for the created HTTP 201 response, which tells us that we've successfully gone and posted this into the queue to be inserted in your OneNote. And then what we're going to send back when there's a successful response is a couple of URIs. So we're going to send you one URI to be able to open OneNote online. So if you want to just open a website to go look at the page that we've created, use that one. And we'll send you a second one to open whatever rich client is available on the machine you're using it on. I've picked the rich client one here. You can see that I've used OneNote client URL. And I've actually just pulled this out with a little bit of JSON.NET parsing. What I find, to be honest, at the moment is that when I'm building these things, I'm not really bothering to use the object models for a lot of these APIs, if they provide them, because I'm finding that I don't want to pull all of that code into my application and bloat out my application. And usually I only want to pick a couple of fields out of the return JSON. So it's really just as easy for me to use JSON.NET directly and just go and grovel through the JSON a couple of levels using dynamic. And the code in C# using dynamic to do that over JSON.NET is so easy and elegant. And it's really no more brittle than when the response packet changes than using an object model. So I've found that I'm liking that way. And all of the code that I've used in here to pull together API calls all takes that approach. So I'm going to return that URI. And if you remember, what I was doing with that URI when I came out of making this call was I was using Windows to launch it, and as you saw, OneNote popped up. OK, so we've got that page there. But one of the things that I find when I go to concerts is that it's often not particularly great cell phone reception. So all this stuff is going to have sunk down to my OneNote before I go into the concert. But if we go back to my OneNote and look at my news, if I want to try and read that news while I'm waiting for the band to come on, go and click on my headlines to drill through to the full page, it's actually going to launch in a browser, which is not a whole lot of use if it just sits there not refreshing, because I'm in some dusty concert gig with no cell phone reception. So wouldn't it be nice to pull this into OneNote as well? So this had all pre-synced, and then I could just guarantee that I could read it synced down on my phone. So let's go and add that facility. OK, so the first thing I'm going to want to do is go and add something to my data holder to let me hold a URL to a new OneNote page. So I'm going to add a new OneNote page for each of those news articles. I'll need a URI to be able to link through to it from the front page. So I'm going to go into my news data model object, and I'm going to go in and add public URI, and I'm going to call it deep link get set. OK. And then I'm actually going to need a OneNote page to create. I'm going to cheat a little bit with this and pull in one that a skeleton of one that I've prepared. So you don't have to watch me type too much HTML. So here's my news page. So this is a completely empty HTML page with just the date and the title set. So what I want to do here is use one of those content helpers that I talked about earlier. So I'm actually going to add an image tag. But instead of setting the source on the image, as you would with standard HTML, we've added another extension. And again, we're using the data tag for this, which is standard HTML5 extensibility. So it's actually fully compliant with HTML5. So I'm going to add data render source, which is our custom tag, equals. And then I think it's news URI that I'm going to use as my replacement token. And then it's kind of nice anytime you go and do this kind of thing to go and attribute the data. So I'm going to just go and add a paragraph, and I'm going to put in that source and put a link, href equals, and again I'm going to use the same URI, news URI, and then news URI again for the actual text. So very easy, using the same replacement token 3 times, kind of cheating almost. So what's that data render source actually going to do? I want rich content. I want the page to get pulled down. We're actually going to go off and snapshot the website for you as soon as we see that data render source. And you can pass in the URI here, or you can pass in one of those URLs with the name colon, so you can actually pull down the content. Perhaps you have a private website or an intranet site that you want to pull down and paste into OneNote, which we wouldn't be able to reach on the public internet. If so, you can pull it down, save the bytes in a multi-part part, and reference that with a news colon. OK. That hopefully is everything. OK. So one thing I need to remember to do is go and set the content type on this to content, otherwise nothing's going to happen. It won't get deployed as part of my assets. Okay. So now I need to actually go and add a method to use that HTML. So I'm going to go back to my OneNote facade. I've created myself a little stub to fill in here. So I've got an empty method to create a news page. And I'm going to pull this together. So the first thing I need to do is go and read my asset in. So this is really just the same code as we saw at the top of the page for the main page. I'm going to do the authorization. I'm going to pull my live SDK authorization in and set my session access token. This lets me authenticate to OneNote using those scopes that we saw earlier. And then I'm going to go in and use the stream reading, but now I'm going to read in my news page assets. Read that to the end. So now I've got my basic template. Now I've got to go and do the replaces for that news URI. So I'm going to pull those in. And of course it's news URL, not news URI. Okay, let me just go back and fix that. News URL. News URL. News URL. Okay. And then the title and the date. So now I've got a fully formed piece of HTML. And then I'm going to post that to OneNote. Now this time, I don't have any extra data. I'm not using any of those name colon, so I don't need a multi-part content. I can just post a very simple piece of content. This time I'm just creating an HTTP request, and I can just use simple string content and send that HTML across. So my presentation content is my HTML as string, and I'm setting it as text/HTML. I don't need to name it because it's just a one-part message. And then I, again, will post that asynchronously to OneNote. Now this time I want to get those deep links out again because I want to be able to click through to the page using the deep link that the API call returns. So again, I'm using JSON to get the deep link out with my links.OneNote client URL.href to parse that JSON, extract the deep link that comes back from the service. But what I'm going to do now, instead of returning that value, is actually set that deep link property that I set up on my data model so I can come back and use it later when I'm creating the main page to link across to my new news page. So let's go do that. Let's go and modify my main page. And if you remember, we had a method where we're actually constructing those little news blobs, make horizontal news strip. So I need to go and change the anchor tag that was linking to the public internet to link across to my new OneNote page instead. So it's still an href of 0. But this time, if I go and look at the thing that I'm linking to in my string.format for that anchor tag, it's not now the URI, which is on the public internet, it's now the deep link. So that's a pretty simple change. Okay, so creating the table, now pointing to the deep link, I've created the new pages. Last thing I've actually got to do is go and call this once for each piece of news that I need to do. So I need to go back to my gig view model, go down to the end, and go, sorry, the gig view model, not the gigs one, go down to the end. And where I had all my tasks that I'm going and calling, making the API calls, I need to go and add some tasks to asynchronously create my new pages, one for each piece of news. So let's go and add a task for each of those. So I'll do a quick for each. News item, and it's gig.artistnews, I think is my collection of artist news items. And then I'll say task.add, and it's OneNote facade, create artist news page async. I need to pass in the actual news item into that I want it created. And I need auth because I'm going to talk to OneNote, so I'm going to pass in this .auth client. Okay. So is that absolutely everything? Well, not quite. All of these tasks are going to run in parallel. So if I run them in parallel and I'm creating the OneNote pages, if I haven't already filled out the list of news items, then the two things are just going to be in a race condition and it's all probably going to blow up. So I need to go and take out the fetching the news out of my list of parallel tasks to be executed. So pull that out at the top. And instead of adding that to the list. I actually just need to go and await that. So now that will run before any of the other tasks get started, and before the parallel set runs, I'll know that I've got the news items so I can make the OneNote pages. All the rest of the stuff can be in parallel with that, so we won't add too much to the overall call time. Okay, so hopefully I've got everything there. Let's run that up and see how it does. No compile errors, that's a good start. So, my single sign-on has worked. Go import my gigs, they'll stream in slowly. And should we try Depeche Mode this time at the Showbox Sodo, which is a venue that probably holds about, I don't know, 1,000 people, maybe tops. Don't think I'm going to get Depeche Mode in there, sadly, but I can dream. Maybe that's not a dream for all of you, I don't know. Perhaps not that huge Depeche Mode fans. Really? Okay. So, here's my Depeche Mode pages. If I go and click on this now, and then you can see I've now got another page with my news article sunk down into it. So when I walk into my gig, that's all going to be there, nice and ready for me, and I can just click around inside OneNote. I never have to go out to the public web. Well, one of them worked anyway. Not quite sure what happened in that one. The second one. Okay, so what do we see there? We clearly saw a mashup of a whole bunch of consumer APIs. OneDrive, OneNote, Bing Maps, third-party services. Sky's your limit, really. That's really been a kind of a transformative thing for me over the last, I don't know, maybe 18 months. When I was looking around doing something similar to this a couple of years ago, there were APIs for a few things here and there, but it was kind of spotty. If you go and look now for any hobby that you might have, or any interest you have, or any kind of business domain, there are just APIs exploding everywhere. I guarantee you, whatever, go and Google for your hobby and stick API on the end, and you'll find a bunch. So the ability to do this kind of thing has really just exploded in the last year or so. So we showed rich interlinked pages. Obviously, that makes a great experience in OneNote. You can just browse around. Everything can be synced offline. We showed being able to get content into your application very richly by snapshotting web pages, and you can do that again with public web pages or private internet ones by sending us the bytes. We showed you embedded files. And I want to announce today that we'll have PDF support as an extra rich helper to go and render PDFs. I had it as an embedding here in my application. You'll be able to go and render that PDF directly on the page. So I could have had that ticket synchronized down and just ready to open and show the guy on the door as well. And that will be live maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but anyway, soon enough that I'm announcing it today. And I showed you multi-part MIME for when we've got byte streams of data that we want to pull down locally rather than have OneNote pull down, and how to wrap that together very easily. So let's flip gears. Obviously, we have a REST API, and that means that we can talk to this from any platform. OneNote is on every platform. So if your customers are using OneNote on any platform, they're going to expect to use your applications that extend OneNote on any platform. So I want to do something that's very scary for me, because I've never done it before. And that's demo from a Mac. OK, so here's our iOS sample for OneNote. So all of our samples are up on GitHub. And we've got samples across Windows platforms, Android, and iOS. And here's some code. This is just creating a very simple page in OneNote. Here, that page is so simple that I've just created the HTML for the presentation, just in line in a string. So you can see that that I've got pretty much the same type of HTML with that meta tag for created. And here I've got an embedding. So again, I'm adding a PDF to the page using that object tag with data attachment and data sent through with that same name colon URI scheme that I'm going to put in a multi-part MIME message. So then to do a multi-part MIME message in Objective-C, who here speaks some Objective-C? OK, not many of you. All right, well, trust me then in that case. Then we're using a third-party open source library called AF Networking, which is very popular in the Objective-C community. And it makes it very easy, to create a multi-part message in a similar way that .NET Framework does. So here you can see I've got a multi-part form data. And I'm using what is Objective-C's equivalent of a Lambda method, which is called a block, to go and add parts to that multi-part message. So I'm adding my presentation part with my string, and then I'm adding my byte stream part with my PDF in it, down here with my attachment part name with a content type of PDF. So very similar, but all expressed nicely in Objective-C. And then I'm going and sending the asynchronous request with this init with request. So doing async in Objective-C is a little bit different. What I'm actually going to do is more the equivalent of sending a message off and implementing an interface on my class, which Objective-C calls a delegate. So I call that init with request, and what's going to happen is my class, you see I'm calling it on self. So it's going to, self is the equivalent of the this pointer in Objective-C. So it's going to come back to my class and call through the delegate interface into the same class. So then, this is very small, did receive response, and did finish loading. So this is the implementations of that interface in my Objective-C code, where the data is going to come back. And again, I'm looking at that response, looking for a 201, and then this is the equivalent of parsing out the JSON to go and get those URLs. So let's run this up. Oh, the one thing actually that I didn't mention was the live SDK. So the live SDK for making that auth easy is also right there for Android and iOS. So you can use exactly the same techniques, and those logging calls are exactly the same on all of our platforms. So let's run this one up. So this time it's a very simple UI, just a list of types of things I can do in OneNote. Fire up my attachment, and then I've got to go sign in. So I didn't do the single sign in on this. So try not to read my password out loud. Okay, so now because this is the first time I've signed in on this machine, this is actually challenging me to tell me which scopes it is that the application has requested. So we didn't see that on the single sign-in for Windows because I've already signed into that machine hundreds of times, whereas I cleared the cache on this machine before the demo. So this is now telling me that list of things that I asked for in my scopes. In this case, it asked to sign in automatically, access my info anytime, and create pages in OneNote. So this is the prompt your users will get to enable them to have trust that your application is only doing the things that they want it to do, and their chance to opt out and say, no, I don't like what you're asking to do. I didn't give you permission to access everything in my SkyDrive, for instance. Okay, so I'm going to say yes. So now I'm signed in. I can hit my create page button. This is going off and making my asynchronous call, and hopefully, yes, there we go. My response is coming back with a 201, and I can go and have a look in my OneNote and let that synchronize. Probably should have synchronized the other pages beforehand. There we go. Oh no, it's come through pretty quickly. So that's going up to the REST client and then synchronizing down from the internet, obviously, into my local client. And here's my attached page with my PDF that I just created. So, iOS, flip back to this machine very quickly. How are we doing for time? Okay, I'm just going to have a very, very fast look at Android, just so you get the sense that the same code is there. So the next sample that we have on our roadmap that we're going to add to this is probably PHP, which we're sort of getting ready now. So sometime in the next few weeks, we'll have a PHP sample. I'll let that churn away. Come on. There we go. So this is Eclipse. And you can see I've got pretty much exactly the same code written in Java here for Android, and that same HTML setup, the same data attachment. This time I'm using the intents method in Android to go and make the asynchronous call. So I'm not going to go through the same code in this in any great detail, but just so you get the idea that we've got all of that techniques there explained for all of our platforms. Okay. So what do we see on those cross-platform samples? We saw the live SDK on iOS, and obviously we're using the live SDK on Android as well. So the auth is really easy to do on every platform. We saw that there's equivalent ways to do async on all the platforms, and that we were doing page attachments for PDF files, and that you'll be able to do the same thing for doing PDFs and hopefully, say, by the end of today or tomorrow. So it was pretty easy to write that code on iOS, but it's getting even easier. I'm really excited about this. So ShareKit is a really great open source library on iOS. That's been around for a little while now that lets you send very quickly a chunk of information, a file or a URL or something like that, to a whole bunch of services that you might want to save it to for later. So it sends to OneDrive, Dropbox. It sends to Facebook and Twitter. So whether it's social or personal storage, it's a very single one-stop shop for you to be able to go and send it. And the real key value of ShareKit is it's literally 4 lines of code to do a send, because all of that's been wrapped up in a library for you. So Microsoft has contributed to this OSS project a OneNote provider. So now you can use those same 4 lines of code for your users to be able to send to OneNote. And that today, I'm very pleased to announce, is actually live now on the GitHub for ShareKit. So here are those 4 lines of code. Really, really trivial to be able to send that, again, Objective-C. But you're just really just saying, here's the file, here's the UI that I'd like to have brought up and launch it parented on my top-level window. And what you'll get is this UI coming up. User gets to pick where they want to send it, click OK, authenticate to whatever the service's authentication pattern is without you having to do any of the authentication work at all, completely done inside the library, and off you go. Very, very easy. So it's a great open source project. All right. So let's switch gears completely to the future now. Now, what you've seen from my demos is obviously that the shape of our API is about creating pages. That's obviously the first thing you have to do, right? If you want to integrate with OneNote, you've got to be able to create pages. But that's really just the start of a journey. Obviously, we need you to be able to do much, much more to create rich experiences. But we wanted to get something out there. And particularly when we were starting to think about how we would build this API and how we would build a release roadmap, the whole point of this is that we're trying to build an ecosystem of people integrating with us. So we wanted to be building it alongside the people who are working on our API, taking their feedback very seriously, and growing as our partners grow and as the things they can do grow. So we've put up a user voice. Who's familiar with user voice? About half of you. So user voice is a really great site for putting up websites, for giving product feedback around features that people want to do. So we put up a OneNote dev one there, seeded it with a few things that we're thinking of doing anyway, and then thrown it open for people to vote. And people have already started to build up some nice ideas and to show us some direction. So here's the roadmap that we've published of things that we were originally planning to do to get some feedback on. We've already had a fairly strong vote on user voice that our to-do tags here should move a little bit higher up that list, so we'll probably move these a little bit further up the list. PDF rendering, cross that off. Maybe a little bit premature, cross it off at 8 o'clock tonight. We know our error messages coming back from the API are really not very great today. We're going to fix that. We're going to have really top-line error messages, so if something goes wrong, you can work out easily whether it was something that you did in your message or whether it was a problem on our side. The very first thing that people want to be able to do is choose where in OneNote to go create a page. Our API at the moment always creates it in the default location. We hope to have something out to allow you to do that in a very, very short period of time. That's probably in a race at the moment with the error messages for which is going to ship first. Obviously, then we need to flesh out our CRUD model. So you can create a page with our current API. You need to be able to update pages, read them, and delete them. And equally, you need to be able to go and query and find pages that match a certain set of criteria to be able to do those operations on them. In terms of page content, to do, as I say, probably rising up the list because of user voice. But I really want you to, and I really mean this, to help us shape the backlog. We are going to listen. We are going to change priorities based on what people tell us in the community. So, what's my call to action? Go get the clients for your devices, first of all. I'm sure you've all got interesting, diverse set of things in your pockets and purses. There's a OneNote client that's free for all of them now. Go get it. Use it every day. That's the first thing that will spark your ideas for applications. learn the API at our portal, developer.onenote.com. Follow us on Twitter and read our blog. Obviously, that's how we'll do a broad outwards communication. In terms of technical questions, we'll be hanging out on Stack Overflow. So there's a OneNote tag that you can find very easily on Stack Overflow. Go bug us there. Code samples are all up on GitHub, and we'll be adding more across platforms. There's a section on our user voice for samples where you can go vote for which ones you want next. Please do. That's a link to the ShareKit GitHub to go get that. And above all, please go on to user voice and tell us what you want from the API, because that's how we'll build this thing together. So we really believe on our team that by far the most amazing memories are you and your family doing things that you're passionate about. Hopefully you've got a sense today that I'm pretty passionate about going to concerts and about how much my wife regrets that. Those are the best memories. We think OneNote's the best place for digital memories. My ask of you is please go build apps that join those two together for your passions. Thank you very much. Oh, and please, as ever, even though it's the end of the week, take the time to do the eval.